It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions, or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to #EventIcons, episode 124. Wow, time is flying by. And today we have probably one of my favorite topics that I don't know how we haven't covered this yet. But as a business owner, a nerd in general, and someone who loves to measure things, we are talking today about one of my favorite topics, which is event KPIs. And you might be wondering, what is a KPI? Well, KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator, or you may have heard of the term metrics before. We essentially are going to be talking about how can you use numbers to manage your events and make them even better. And I promise you, our guest today is going to drop some serious knowledge bombs, because literally this is what he does for his life, is put together amazing event metrics. So why don't we jump right on into episode 124. Here we go. All right. Today I am joined by the amazing Daniel Sherbakov. Did I get it right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. We were betting if I was going to get it right or not. But thank God for phonetics. But Daniel is seriously awesome when it comes to event metrics. And we had a great conversation, which led to this concept of this episode. And he actually has an amazing product called Radario, Radario, and based in Moscow, right? Or no,
St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg.
I always forget that too.
You know, it's like a kind of funny story, but when I say in the United States that I'm from St. Petersburg, people I keep thinking that I'm from Florida.
I love it. I love it. No, definitely not Florida for sure. But Radario is an awesome platform that's designed for you to measure your events and get those metrics. And we're going to talk a lot about that a little bit later. What kind of metrics should you be managing? What sort of KPIs, all that sort of stuff. But, you know, we got to jump right into this because there's too much to cover right now. So got to welcome to the show, everyone. Big round of applause. Daniel Sherbakov. Shcherbakov. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get it right. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and I'm really glad to be in here. Like, you know, it's like it's present. It is like 12 a.m. in St. Petersburg and in Moscow as well, and I'm all wake up, and you know, I'm really glad to be in here.
I know. You can tell the beautiful city behind you is obviously blooming right now.
I think so.
And we were having a talk offline. By the way, if you didn't know, this is a video podcast. If you're listening to the audio version of this, you're missing out. But we had a joke that Daniel actually doesn't know what city is behind him. So if you're watching this recording and you can figure out what city is behind Daniel and tweet it to us, put it in the Facebook group, all that sort of stuff, we will give you some free swag from EventIcons. So that's our bet, is to figure out what city is behind you, because I couldn't figure it out. So Daniel, let's jump right in. Tell everybody your story. What kind of got you to where you are today and becoming kind of the god of event metrics and the KPIs?
Thank you so much. So, you know, like, I'm kind of a startup guy and a geek as well, you know, and I'm in the startup industry for like over 5 years. Like, it's like Radario is not the first project that I'm taking part in. Actually, like before, I took part in a great project in the virtual reality. Like, you know, to be honest, like, let's say, looking back into my past, I can say that I was always been into the entertainment industry. Like, before it is virtual reality, and we became one of the biggest virtual reality developers in terms of games. Right now, I'm the event industry, and you know, like, we are really rocking the event industry by using helping the people to use KPIs and all that stuff, you know. So like, for the last 2 years, I'm mostly in the, and not like mostly, I'm only in the event industry, and I really loved it. You know, like, the things that I'm loving the most in the event industry, this is like a blue ocean. Like, you know, all of the tactics that are common, let's say, in the game development, or let's say, I don't know, in the digital advertisement. Like, you know, they are really uncommon in the event industry. People are still sending the bulk mailings, you know. They do not use, like, I don't know, targeted email marketing campaigns. You know, like targeting email marketing campaigns are already outdated in the digital world, but, you know, like not even those. So, like, you know, I feel myself like a pioneer, and I'm honestly passionate about being able to transform this industry, like, you know, to being able to disrupt this industry. You know, this is pretty much where I'm like, I'm a business development guy. I'm not a developer, but, you know, I'm a huge geek. I'm passionate about having an opportunity, let's say, you know, on the common, you know, my mission is like, it's not to sell the product. My mission is, let's say, to help the people to find the events that they're most likely to be interested in. Like, you know, get rid of the spam, get rid of all of this stuff, like make the advertisement targeted and interesting for those who receive it.
I love it. I think we definitely need that more. And I think you brought up a really good point that there's so much in the events industry and so much opportunity because you know, we're a little archaic in some ways, and we talk about this all the time, that there's things like, we don't have like a lot of, you know, barriers to entry into our industry. So yeah, how can we take from other places? And I think the business development portion, I think people are going to find interesting. And for those who don't do a lot of business development, I think it's probably one of the industries that is most highly metricized. Is that a word? Metricized? It's like metricated. Like,
yeah,
we're gonna make a word.
I got it.
You know, like it has so many metrics, like the number of people you call, how many people you're connected with, how many emails you send, everything like that.
And people are still ignoring these metrics, you know, surprisingly.
Exactly. And so how can we bring a little bit of metrics into the events industry then, which I think is going to be cool. So before we jump into that, if you weren't in the events industry and weren't doing business development for Radario, what would you be doing instead?
You know, I think I consider myself probably as an analytics guy. You know, like honestly, I love numbers. You know, like numbers is not boring. You know, like being an analyst is not like being like an accountant. Like accountants are great people. You know, I'm not like saying, but it's not, for me, honestly, it's boring. But let's like say digging and diving deep into the numbers is interesting because, you know, you might find something interesting about your audience that you have never thought before. Like here's like interesting thing, not connected to the event industry, but it is all about the big data and all that stuff. Let's say on average in the United States, people purchase orange cars mostly on Wednesdays. Like somehow, you know, like
it's like, have you seen Freakonomics or read Freakonomics, the book?
Yeah.
Weirdest stuff. But it all can be told in numbers, which I think is really, really interesting. And I think we were having that conversation beforehand that a lot of planners are more like touchy-feely, and especially when things are going good, right? Like metrics aren't this thing that you're like, oh yeah, my event's sold out and I have making great.
Don't care about it.
Now, let's look into like the analytics of where people are going, right? You're usually like, everything's great. Let's just keep doing the same thing. But I think that the numbers and the ideas that we generate during this call or during this show will definitely give people a good idea of what to look out for. So let's really quickly kind of define this idea of metrics really, really quickly. You know, at what point, let's start with this. Do you think at some point you can get too nitty-gritty when it comes to measuring something, period? Like, is there such thing as too many metrics? What is your kind of thought process around how many metrics or numbers someone should be looking at?
You know, you're absolutely right in the point that, let's say, there are, like, having too many metrics is an opposite of not having metrics at all. You know, like when you're deciding what kind of metrics you need to collect, your first thing that you need to do is to set goals. Let's say, what are you trying to achieve by measuring specific metrics? Like, do you want to increase event attendance? Or do you want to measure how many new versus returning attendees do you have regularly on your events? You know, setting goals will prevent you of having too many metrics. And also, let's say shortly right after you start measuring metrics, you would be able to understand what kind of metrics are useless. You know, like no, this is not like a constant thing. There is no wrong and right answers. You need to constantly work with the audience. You need to constantly measuring the metrics, and this is how you gain experience.
Interesting. So, you know, do you think that the metrics that someone chooses the first time will be the metrics that they use for? That's a leading question. Of course, like you're always going to be constantly evolving what metrics you're going to be using too. Well, I keep like wanting to go to the question that's going to be like the biggest question I think here, like avoid it and work around it. But we'll get into what everyone's probably asking: what metrics should I be measuring? What sort of things should I be measuring? But I think that's really important for like that you make as a good point is that there is such thing as too many metrics. Do you think it's important to pick simply in the beginning, or pick lots and whittle down to a small amount? Like, should you start with a couple and start small and expand, or should you start big and go backwards? What's your kind of thought process?
From my point of view, the things that you need to do is probably for the first to select only the main metrics. Actually, I will tell you more about them lately, because actually I did my homework and prepared you, let's say, like the most important metrics that I think could be could apply to any kind of events. Like they're really easy to understand, and moreover, they're not so hard to calculate. Like second grade math, like nothing. You just need to divide something to something, that's all. Like people, like a lot of people considering that like analysts, or I don't know, like metrics, you need to do a lot of math, like you need to spend hours in front of computer. No, it's not, like genius and simplicity, and this is like a cruel thing. The most like like people consider it as a hard thing, but it is not. You just need to start. Like you need to overcome yourself and then actually start measuring metrics. Like there's no big deal in that.
Do you think that in what you've seen, obviously like, you work with a lot of event planners, meeting planners today. What do you think? Do you find that most people at least have some sort of metric they're measuring, or do you find most people have nothing that they're measuring?
It's really interesting. It's a really complicated question. I will explain you why. The thing is that, let's say, the event industry is not heterogeneous. What do I mean by that? Is there like enterprise level event organizers, like, I don't know, like NBA teams, like, I don't know, like nationwide exhibitions and all that stuff. These guys got budgets. When you got budgets, you could afford anything. Like any kind of enterprise level software. You could even, let's say, hire some kind of guys to develop something that you need to. Like, let's say, like 1 week ago, as we actually discussed before the show, I get back from Dallas and I was there at the conference. That was only for the enterprise level sports companies. And the idea is that actually I visited all of the lectures, and they were really great, honestly. Probably the best conference that I have ever attended. But the thing is, let's say, these guys are more than aware what they need, and they're actually executing all of the things, let's say, that our company is actually offering already. Mainly because that actually, they could afford, let's say, paying like 10 or even 100 times more than actually our solution cost. And, this is like some kind of a different level of companies. And speaking of the small and medium businesses, like event organizers, they're totally different. Like, I don't want to promote Radario right now, but I just would like to give you an explanation why we started Radario.
Absolutely.
The idea is, let's say, we found out that not even in Russian market, but also in the United States market, there are no analytics and marketing solution, especially for the event industry, for the small and medium segment. This is why we started the company. Somehow there are lots of enterprise tools. They're great, but you just couldn't afford paying a couple of $1,000 a month. Like for some events, it's a budget of a whole event. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you bring up a really good point that I think you talked about, like the math, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but also at the same time you hit on the fact that like this doesn't have to be expensive to figure this out. Like a lot of people think when it comes to like surveying their events, oh my gosh, I have to bring in like a survey company and a third party this and do, all this like complicated stuff, but it can be really simple. So, obviously, like EventIcons, we're not all about promoting people, but I think your platform is really, really cool. But talking more so about like what you've seen inside tools people might already be using, what sort of, I always keep going back to what sort of metrics, but what sort of places should people go look to find this information, maybe in tools they're already using? For example, like their registration software, maybe their accounting software. Where should people be kind of going to look without having to adopt an analytics platform of its own?
This is kind of tricky question. Let's say as a business development guy, and let's say from my perspective, the funny thing is that people not only not measure metrics because, they don't want to, but also because, they are not aware that they could measure them. But if you're not thinking that you could do something, you won't do it. And the idea is that, let's say, speaking of the ticketing platforms or registration software, people just, satisfied with the amount of data that these systems provide. But, it is not equal that these systems provide all of the data. This is a kind of thing. So let's see, people might use Excel for the attendees management. This is like really boring, like time-consuming thing to download and upload. But this is the things that you could do right now, and probably this is the main problem of the industry, because let's say the industry is it's getting more open to the third-party companies. But from my point of view, let's say the ticketing companies, let's say, is a basis of the whole event industry, because you need to buy tickets, you need to gain revenue, not only from sponsors, but from ticket sales, are not so open to third parties and are not so open to share the data to being able to measure metrics. And at the very same time, they are really tight in the engineering resources. So they are not able to create a really powerful analytics and marketing tools on their own. So this is some kind of a problem thing. But let's say once we started our company, we see that it is changing, not because of us, obviously, but probably we were in the right place, the right time. But I have spoken to many event organizers, to many, let's say, our competitors and clients and all that stuff. And, they told me, let's say, 5 years ago, they were nothing. Even if you wanted to, they were nothing. People really care about the data, about the privacy, they don't want to share the data with anybody, but now it's changing.
Totally. And I think you bring up a really good point that now people are a little bit more aware that they need to do this. But I guess the question we'll spend a lot of time on today is how can they do this? So my next question kind of is, what would you say to the planner who says, I already have so much on my plate, I don't have time to tack on the word analyst to the end of my, my job description, right? What would be your recommendation for someone who's too busy to take this on?
My main recommendation is that if you sell out your event, let's say from event to event, you sell out all the tickets, it doesn't mean that you are a successful event organizer. It might be shocking for the first time, but at the very same time, let's say this is probably the simplest example. Probably the cost of attendees acquisition is higher than the revenue from them. Let's say,
can you define what that means? The cost of revenue segmentation.
Sure. So the cost of user acquisition is, let's say, if you are using, for instance, digital advertisement, on Facebook, somewhere else. So let's say, how much should you spend to acquire a user that will buy a ticket, comparing to what is the ticket price? So let's say you sell out all of the tickets, but you actually do not earn any kind of money. So this is kind of a tricky thing. So it's I can imagine how passionate the event organizers are. And probably this is the other thing that actually event organizers are they're artists. I'm honestly in that. They do not want to spend so much time on analytics because they want to create, they want to inspire people. And probably the main goal of this podcast is not to, let's say, it's also about explaining metrics, but also explaining that it is easy to measure them. It's affordable to anybody. You just need to start, and it will be positively affect on your events. I guarantee it. Here is an interesting thing by Harvard Business Review, and it is applicable to any industry.
Absolutely.
Returning an attendee or customer is 7 times cheaper than to find a new one. Just think about that. Being able to measure the analytics, being able to target it to your customers, will save you a ton of money and will save you a ton of time. It's priceless.
Interesting. So do you think it's wise, since planners are more creative, like you're saying, do you think it's wise for them to then bring someone on their team that is more analytical? Would you recommend that?
It depends on the budget, honestly. Let's see. First of all, it depends on the budget, and the second thing, it depends not on the analytics system, but it depends on the ticketing system. I give you let's say, an example. without without giving you names of the companies, like not to promoting them and let's say not to shaming them, just to understand you better what I'm thinking about. There is a ticketing platform that you need to spend 2 hours to connect this ticketing system to a CRM. It was even hard for me as a tech guy. And you could imagine how hard it is to the people who actually face this problem for the first time. And probably this is another problem why people keep skipping on the analytics side. You know, like, no, I'm selling all the tickets, like I'm cash positive, and, you know, it's so hard. So, you know, I will do it some other day. Like, you know.
Procrastination.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as it is.
Awesome. I definitely think we all get into that procrastination mode.
It's normal. It's normal. But, you know, when actually, you know, when the procrastination, you will spend more time than you need. Like, it's like.
That's true. That's very true. We're getting a lot of really good questions in from everyone. So your kind of recommendation is obviously look at the budget, but if you can afford it, maybe bringing someone in analytically to start thinking about this. But at the same time, if you can figure it out, you got to probably make it a priority, right?
You know, actually, if you will spend a bit effort and figure it out by yourself, you know, this is kind of startup approach. Before hiring somebody, just to better understand what you need to. Because, you know, there are actually, from my point of view, the real great analysts in the event industry, especially in the small and medium business sector, are really rare. You know, like, and it is better for you. You know, it's really easy to teach the analysts what you know, this is like industry specific analytics. You know, it is better for you to, like, say, spend, I don't know, like 1 week, you know, not more, like and to understand what you need to measure, then hire a guy and explain him your goals, and then you're ready to go. I think, you know, this is the best scenario that I could imagine.
I think you bring up a good point too. Like, a lot of times I think it's a general hiring tip as well. I mean, like, a lot of times we hire someone because we don't know how to do it, but sometimes that can be really dangerous if you're a smaller team and you can't afford to make mistakes, right? So instead, learn it yourself to the point where, hey, I understand it and I can have a good fluent conversation. I know what I need, and then hand it off to someone, because in that way too, you also know you're not getting the wool pulled over your eyes, right? Okay. Let's see here. Oh my gosh, so many good questions. I want to jump into, we got a lot of time, and I want to start jumping into potential metrics. So I think everyone understands basic metrics, right? Like revenue that came from the event, how much it costs to put on the event, how much profit you maybe made, maybe number of ticket sales attendees that you're going to have. And I'm trying to go over all the obvious ones so then that way I can data dump all the easy ones, right? So those are all obviously easy metrics for you to get, and you probably know where to get them from your ticketing platform, from your Excel spreadsheet, your accounting software. However, there are probably unlimited amount of KPIs, which is I'm hoping that we can fill it with them as many as possible so you can see the possibilities. But as we discussed earlier, obviously pick the easy ones and the simple ones first, right? So with that being said, with some basic ones out of the way, let's just kind of, I want to do a rapid fire. I know a ton of metrics too, so I'd love to share some of them too, but maybe Daniel, if you want to go share one KPI or metric and what it is, what it means, and maybe where can people find this information, or how can they simply calculate it, or how do they get to the point where they know what that number metric is. So I'll let you kick it off with the first one.
I'm ready to go. You know, the only thing that I would like to know is that actually, you know, the metrics like revenue, tickets sold, and all that stuff, I would like to be honest with you. Probably I'm kind of straightforward, you know, probably because I'm Russian, I don't know. But I think that, let's say, in the long term, they're useless. You know, they do not show you any kind of insights. Like, you know, like your revenue increased, like, hooray, great. But this metric doesn't show you why it was increased. Was it because of actually, you know, you're more efficient, or was it because you spend more money on the advertisement? You know, like, this is kind of thing. Or
you can have like a lot of revenue, but then spend way more money and end up losing more money, right? Like there's that like vanity metric we call about, like the vanity, the idea that it's all for show and it looks pretty and everyone loves to talk about it, but it doesn't actually mean anything, right?
Yeah. So speaking of metrics, you know, let's start from my favorite one, probably. And actually the ones that actually people keep skipping, and a lot of event organizers that actually I did a demo of our platform, they wasn't even aware of this metric. It's lifetime value of your attendee. Like really simple. What does it mean? It means, let's say, how much money the attendee will generate to your event during his lifetime. By lifetime, I mean, let's say, on average, like here is an interesting inside fact. On average, new attendee attends events for 1.5 years and visiting 8.5 events and spending on average close to $800 on events. It's like an industry average. It doesn't mean that all of the attendees spending so much, but here is an idea. And in that case, it means that lifetime value of this attendee is $800. And that's what it also means. And here we go into the next metric, is a cost, and that we
well, before we go on that one, wait, real quick. Can you kind of, how did you get to that $800 number? Like, what was the kind of formula that you used to get to the lifetime value of $800? So you said, for example, they go to on average 1.5 conferences or so.
No, like this actually, I did my homework for our blog, and actually I found like a research. The researchers concluded that on average, attendees, like new attendees, became like loyal, for instance, for 1.5 years, and during this 1.5 years, they visit 8.5 events and spending close to $800.
Okay, cool. So maybe then so I'm guessing you take for lifetime value, it's the number of events they attend for you, right? Because it's personal to your brand.
Absolutely, of course.
And then you multiply that by how much they spend to go to your event, right? So let's say it's $800 to attend an event. 1.5 times that's $1,200 lifetime value.
Yeah,
Did I do that math right? So 1.5 times the $800 they would spend at each event.
Well, in that case, it means, let's say, if they attended to 8 events, let's say, and their lifetime value is $800. That means, let's say, each event generates you $100. And also it shows you, let's say, keeping this in mind, the average, this is like industry average, but keeping in mind your average of lifetime, of your user, value of your user, you will be able to understand how much money you could spend on advertisement to attract the user to an event. So for instance, if the lifetime of a user, let's say, is, I don't know, like $100, you couldn't spend more than, I don't know, like than $50 to acquire a user. Why I say 50 instead of 100? Because this is an average, and let's say based on my experience, the average cost user acquisition should be twice less than actually the value, the lifetime value of the user.
Well, I think that probably brings you into, so you talked a little bit about the lifetime value, how much money on average you'll be bringing in over the lifetime of that customer. And then you talked a little bit about like the cost per acquisition or the cost to get that customer a little bit earlier, right? Which let me know if I get this formula right. Basically, you kind of average out you add up together all the costs it costs for you to get the number of customers, divide it by the number of customers that you have, and that kind of gives you an average, correct?
Absolutely. So really simple math, like second grade, as I told you.
super easy. I think it's people wonder like, well, how many people have come, all this things like that. Obviously you can figure that out as you go along. And by the way, just so everyone's aware, these aren't like metrics that Daniel's made up. These are actually really common in the marketing industry. And so if you Google things like lifetime value of customer or cost per acquisition or cost per customer, you'll find all these formulas really, really easily. And we'll try to link to as many of them down below, that examples of these. Maybe if our podcasting team, as you're hearing these metrics, if you guys can just plug in articles that explain them, would be awesome. So then you start leading into, I think, a really interesting metric, which is you're talking about lifetime value into cost per customer, and then kind of the the metrics of multiples on top of that you should be making back, kind of the profit margin. It sounds like per customer, right? And you were saying for you 2 times, but maybe someone who has a really high ticket sale, let's say it's $5,000 tickets and it's 99% profit margin for them because the ticket only cost dollar to print or whatever it is, your profit margins are a lot higher. So I think for my metric that I would share is your profit margin per customer as well. Not necessarily, you don't have to look at it as like a whole, like your whole cost of your event and then that sort of thing, which you can do as well, though, if you want to find, okay, we have 1,000 attendees. We're spending $100,000. It costs us $50,000. You have 1,000 attendees. You can kind of know $50 per attendee, bring $50 per profit for each attendee. You can kind of figure out these longer term things. And then this is where it gets, sorry, I'm like probably totally jumping ahead. This is where it gets like really nerdy and exciting.
I'm totally okay. I love passionate people. I'm also passionate in the metrics and all as you are. So, it's like music to my ears, to be honest, not because I don't like speaking, but I'm totally okay with that.
Absolutely. And what's cool is that you can take that profit margin for each attendee and then multiply it by the lifetime value, and you have the lifetime profit of each attendee too, which is really, really cool, because then that's where you can go back to cost per acquisition. If you're making $50 off of each attendee, they go to 1.5 events, $75. You probably shouldn't be spending more than as low as possible, right? Like maybe like $35, $40 or something like that per attendee. Otherwise, you're going to be canceling out your product. So anyways, I get really nerdy with these metrics for sure. So let's jump into the next one, Daniel. So we have cost, lifetime value, cost per acquisition, maybe profit margin per attendee as well. What other sort of metrics are your favorites?
Let's speak about, let's say, the reason why people are creating events, about the attendees. And there are two main metrics, at least from my point of view. The first one is retention rate. This metric is also not an holy grail. It also, as I mentioned before, it came from the marketing industry. And the main idea is, as I was mentioned before, it is 7 times cheaper to retain an attendee than to find a new one. And if you will be able to measure, let's say, the rate of new versus returning attendees, you will be able, let's say, to see. From my point of view, the new versus returning rate is some kind of health monitor of the event. It is not applicable for all of the events. I will explain. Let's say if you have events, let's say in each city, like in this only one-time event, it won't show you anything because all of the attendees will be new. But if you have recurring events, like annual events, I don't know, like weekly events, being able to, and this is some kind of community thing, and being able to measure how many people return, you will be able to say it is better to have more returning attendees than to have more new attendees. And even because we just mentioned, it is way easier to return a customer when he has already purchased a ticket than to find a new one. Also obvious how you could calculate it. This is probably the thing where analytics platform might help you with. You could do it in Excel, but it's some kind of a time-consuming thing. You need to download all the CSV and Excel spreadsheets, then actually manually match all of the attendees' emails. This is kind of a boring stuff. But probably this is one of the main metrics that could show you the health of your events, if I could say it. In Russian I could say it, but I'm not sure. Does it sound correct in English?
I think so. I think it definitely makes sense. It's really, really important for sure. I've also heard that retention rate also be described as churn rate.
Absolutely. Churn rate is some kind of a different thing. The churn rate is all about the churn is, let's say, how many attendees after first purchase disappear. So let's say how many attendees was, let's say, purchase one ticket and then stop purchasing. From my point of view, this is kind of things that, let's say, more metrics. You could start from just measuring the retention rate and new versus returning attendees ratio. And then, let's say, if you need to better understand, let's say, if you see that, let's say, a lot of people showing up for the first time and then actually never showed up again, you probably are able to start to measure the churn rate. But, as a general rule, I think you could start from the metrics that I mentioned before.
Oh, that's interesting. I think the retention rate is really important too, because I think the question it raises too is that if you have people coming, they buy one ticket to your conference and then never come back, the question is obviously, when you explain it that simply, is why didn't they come back? And I think this is a great example of how a number metric that, yeah, you want to make it go lower or higher, but it also shapes the conversations you have in your planning meetings. And also I think to kind of step this up to the next advanced level is that you can take the people who are, for example, if you're measuring how often people are buying tickets, you could set up some automation that, for example, someone who only buys one ticket doesn't come back the next year, and that they didn't become attendee the next year. You send them a survey.
Feedback,
why didn't you come back? Right. And oh my gosh, that's such better feedback than, you know what? I felt like the couches were uncomfortable in the general session. It can be like the person says, you know what? You guys moved the date from September, October, my busy season. I can't make it anymore. And if you find that 50% of your attendees say that, oh man, that gives you a really, really good conversation around dates and what to pick. So, all right, let's go back into some more metrics that you like. So, Daniel, what other sort of metrics are your favorites?
As a funny thing, let's say all of the metrics, you could Google them. So let's follow the same direction and thinking about another general marketing metric is conversation rate. I would like to explain to the audience, let's say, let's say, I'm saying the general metrics, not because, let's say, I do not have specific metrics. I obviously have those. But let's say without measuring these basic metrics, you won't succeed with the specific ones. So let's create, let's say, some kind of a basement of your analytics or marketing, understanding, and then actually go to the next level to the specific metrics. It is very important to understand, so you couldn't jump over this stage. You just need to understand the basic metrics, and then you will be able to figure out what kind of specific dashboards or metrics you need to create specific for your events. So let's get back to the conversation rate. This is like also, I have said that basic, I think probably, we could count how much time I said basic during this podcast. So
that'll be a metric in itself right there.
Yeah, so it's basic. It shows the number of times the visitors of your site, of your ticketing platform, have made a purchase or other targeted action. What do I mean by targeted actions? For instance, follow you on Twitter, or like you on Facebook. This is conversation is ratio of number of site visitors who performed of any targeted actions, and actually to the total number of visitors. It's really simple. You will be able to calculate, let's say, how many people purchase a ticket divided by how many visitors do you have. And as a general rule, industry average is somewhere around 1%. Let's say from 100 visitors, at least one person will buy. And let's say, the funny thing about all of that, let's say, if you have never done such kind of optimization of advertisement, what do I mean by that? Like creatives, text, targeting, you can increase the conversation rate by 5 times. It's really easy. The advertisement online isn't a constant. You're constantly, isn't a constant. Once you set up let's say an ad, you need to measure it. You need to measure the text, the same thing as with the events. And the thing is, let's say the conversation rate, since more and more people purchasing tickets online, is a general online metric. And being able to measure it will give you an idea, let's say, how could you improve on your online ads or your online efforts? What is going wrong and all that stuff. It's really important. It's really basic. And probably, let's say, if you will ask me to name the most general metric of all of that we have discussed already, I will say that conversation rate is the most general one.
Cool. I love it. Oh my gosh, so many questions coming in. We'll come back to that question in just a second. So I think the next question, by the way, before I end that, we've obviously talked about how there's a lot of these are marketing metrics or metrics that you can find from other businesses. And again, we talked about taking from other places, bringing it in. Just Google things like top marketing metrics, top sales metrics, things like that on Google. You'll find a ton of articles that list a lot of these out. Just take them. Don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, again, none of these are made up things that we're just making up on the air right now. So that's one thing I wanted to say really, really quickly. The next question I kind of had that we're getting from the audience is they're saying, hey, lifetime value, these are good. And obviously there's some averages across the industry and things like that. But they want to know, what is a good insert metric number here, right? What is a good lifetime value? What is a good conversion rate? Like what, do you have any sort of feedback for someone who's trying to figure out what their metrics are? And, you know, where do they set the baseline? Where's the goal? How do they set those goals? That sort of stuff.
So let's start from the conversation rate. Industry average is 1%. If you could do 2% or even 3%, my congratulations, you are an outstanding event marketer. I'm not joking, you know, like it's all about the numbers, you know. So this is like 2 or 3% or even more isn't like, is great. But you should understand that you won't get more than like 5%. Let's say I have seen a lot of online campaigns of the events, and the highest conversation rate that I have ever seen is 5%. So let's say 5 people out of 100 purchase a ticket. This is an outstanding result. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the lifetime value, you know, this is a tricky thing. This is, you know, here is the thing. It depends on the type of the events do you have. If you have annual events, let's say, obviously, lifetime value should be over a year or even better, like 2 years. But if you're hosting a weekly events, having a lifetime value of 1 year is outstanding. Like, you know, or at the very same time, if you are hosting the same weekly events from week by week, you know, it's really hard to define. If you are having a community, okay, you know, let's say close to 1 year is also great. But if you are, let's say, having a webinars trying to teach people something, obviously why people should show up once again to your webinar or like any other kind of educational stuff, because you are sharing the same knowledge. So like the first thing, as I mentioned, set your goals. You know, understand that metrics are different from one type of events to another. Speaking to the new versus returning rate, from my point of view, the best ratio is 70% of returning audience and 30% of new audience. But I would like to highlight that this is my observation. You know, this is like not a holy grail. It doesn't mean that what I said is a general. No, you know, it's based on my experience. And you know, speaking of the cost to acquire customer, you know, it's also
depends on the person, right? Or how much ads are costing at that point in time. Go ahead.
So you're absolutely right. It depends on the type of the event. So for instance, if you are creating, let's say, highly targeted specific event, the cost of acquiring a customer would be really high. If you don't have your own database, then you won't be able to return an attendee. But if you are having, I don't know, like a festival of food, like food festival, let's say in New York, obviously the cost to acquire a customer would be really small, but at the very same time, the ticket to this event would be also really cheap. You know, this is kind of a tricky thing to balance between cost to acquire a customer and actually the average check.
Ooh, very interesting. Okay. So, obviously, yeah, like it all depends. I think that's one important thing for people to know too, when you're doing your metrics, is start measuring it right away. And then if you're going up, it's just good too. Like sometimes people look at it, and I think we'll get into my next metric that we want to talk about, which is like customer loyalty. You know, people go like, well, what's a good customer loyalty score? And I was watching a HubSpot actually video, and they were saying, look, it actually, there's no such thing as a good score. As long as it's continually getting better, you're getting better. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind while you're wondering what it should be. So speaking of customer loyalty, man, we're running out of time. We got a lot of good questions. How do you think the best way for people to measure the happiness and loyalty of their attendees?
You know, I think, you know, you're asking the right question. But the first question that you should ask, how they should measure it. Let's say like, what I mean, like, using what kind of tools. And no, I'm not going to promote our software, not at all. The idea is that, let's say, you could measure it using different ways. You could measure it on site, why people are asking them, let's say, like casual talk and all that stuff. What I suggest, and what is based on my experience, you should gather feedback from two main groups. The first group is newcomers, new goers. The people who attend, let's say, your first event. You could automate gathering feedback of their event. The thing is, let's say, when you are doing events, a lot of events a year, you won't see some kind of mistakes in the event organizers that new goers might notice. They will help you to improve your events. And also, since you treat them individually, it is more likely that they will return again to your event or even become a loyal customers. And the second group that you should gather and feedback from is basically your most loyal audience. This is some kind of this is some kind of an audience also that spent not only a lot of money, but a lot of their time. Obviously, time is even more valuable than money, because you can't get it back. And being able to gather their feedback, to understand, let's say, what kind of things they are also looking for. Let's say, how could you improve? It's also very important. How could you measure? The NPV, like I also forgot the term, like NPV or NPC things that everybody is measuring. Like how does it name?
I think like you're talking about NPS score.
Yeah, absolutely. NPS. I'm also forgot about this term.
It's okay. Yeah. Yeah. So NPS, Net Promoter Score. So I'll let Daniel explain it.
The funny thing about the Net Promoter Score, I'm not a fan of the Net Promoter Score. When I gather these emails, most of these emails are mainly goes from the enterprises. Like when you send out, let's say, not like thousands, even hundreds of thousands of emails, it is, you're not able to read all of the answers. Like it is impossible, let's face it. But let's say, if your targeted audiences whom you are getting feedback from is not more than a couple of hundreds, my recommendation is ask them questions. Like, let's say, let them answer questions, even ask them open questions. Not like, do you like the event? Yes or no? No. Ask them open questions only. It gives
what do you like about the event? What do you
dislike? Absolutely. It gives you a tons of prizeful insights. You have never think about it. You have never thought about them probably. Let's say, and also this is a trick. Not only ask them questions, but at the end also ask them such kind of a question like, are there any kind of questions that we haven't asked but you would like to answer? Like.
I love that.
And,
what question do you think you can answer or ask?
Absolutely. And it is even better than Net Promoter Score. Honestly, let's say, from small and medium perspective, from small and medium businesses that our company is working with, it works way better because, let's say you send an email and you got a Net Promoter Score as 9. So what? It's like revenue.
Yeah.
And, and when I think about Net Promoter Score and all that stuff, you should understand that people, let's say, consider each score differently. So for instance, I'm like a shy guy and I give everybody 10. It doesn't mean anything. And for instance, the same guy gives to the same event with the same level of excitement 7. Why? Because, he's such kind of a guy. So it is better to ask people than to give them a way to decide,
Yeah, that makes sense. It can sometimes be too vague. I love that. I think if you don't know a Net Promoter Score, it's important for you to know what it is for sure. But I do definitely agree that the Net Promoter Score is only as good as the follow-up questions that you get to answer and the conversations. And I think that's something that I think in general, business people, marketers across the board don't do really well. We get these scores, we get these metrics, we're like, cool. But then we never call the people to conversate with them and follow up. Okay, why are you displeased? Why are you not happy? Wow. Time is flying by so fast right now.
As you mentioned.
We are getting, as I totally told you, I tell all of our guests, the hour is going to go way faster than you expect it to. So I do want to kind of wrap up and start going into our last 2 questions. This has been awesome. So when it comes to tips, obviously, what would be your one tip that you would have for event planners, whether it's, metric related or not? What would be your one tip for planners?
Not to rely on your observations. Each decision should be data-driven. If the event organizer would like to be successful in the long-term perspective.
Ooh, I like it. So don't see things for face value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. I think that's really important because we're all very, very busy, right? And I think that's like a thing that everyone loves to say. But sometimes you think you get too busy for your own good. So don't be afraid to go deeper into something, look into it a little bit more, and you'll be surprised what you can find, for sure. All right, awesome. All right, cool. And I know you have a ton of these resources, so I'd love to go down the list of all the resources I know you have. And I know the first one is a laptop that we both share our love for. So why don't you share all of your resources with us that you have for us today, Daniel?
Actually, do I need to paste them into the chat or what?
Nope, you're all good. We'll get them all in the show notes. So for everyone tuning in, you don't have to worry about like searching for them right now. I mean, you can obviously, but we will have all these in the show notes posted after the show.
Perfect. Let me open my list once again. Actually, I need. Yep. So here we go. So let's. I think we could discuss gadgets a bit later. Let's talk about, let's say, really useful links and resources that I find useful for the event organizers. So the first thing is, let's say, as I told you at the beginning, let's say 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, there were no event technology startups somehow. And probably that is why actually we spent the whole webinar discussing the basic things in all other industries. This is probably the thing that I really love about the event industry. I know what to do, and I got great example from other industries, and I could implement them here. So my first link is 25 event technology startups to watch this fall. This is a guide by Event Manager blog. To be honest, one of my favorite blogs on the internet about the event industry, and they create a list. Actually, we voiced the list at that list like 1 year ago. By the way, we're pretty much proud of it. We didn't pay a cent for it. I definitely like to mention, this is not a kind of a paid thing. They do it on their own. It's like, it is really important. So the idea is, let's say, have a look at those startups. Probably they could give you an idea how you could implement their technology at your events. Just being able, let's say, just to being able to be aware, let's say, as we talked, you do not know what you could do if you couldn't do it. But when you see the descriptions of the startup, it's like, hey, I could do that. It's really great.
Awesome. Feel free to keep going through all the lists.
The second thing is the content marketing thing. It is more for the startups. I mean, let's say it is more useful for the startups, but if you are having a conference, I don't like an industry-specific website and conference. The content marketing is the answer to all of your marketing efforts. The content marketing is free. If you create a great article, it will generate you traffic to your website, to a conference for ages. And it also gives you credibility of being an expert in this area. And this book basically, we already mentioned HubSpot, and this book is by one of the co-founders of HubSpot, and they are giving you like a plan, a blueprint, how to create a great content, how to make it interesting for the users, and how to gain money out of that. And for all of the event organizers that are hosting conferences, or I don't know, like any other events that are in the professional sphere, I highly recommend to have a look at it. It's definitely worth of your time, and and it will give you supply with tons of insights. Because I saw a lot of companies, even our company. We created a blog and created really interesting articles, but somehow nobody reads them. Then actually we implement the findings that we get from this book, and we got several articles that are ranked at top 10 at Google without paying any cent of advertisement, and it gives our viewers. It's very important.
I was going to add to that too, that the inbound marketing book's really, really fantastic. If you're more of like a visual learner rather a reader, they actually have a great online course that you can watch for free. They have an inbound company course that teaches you how to think inbound, period. Then they have an inbound marketing one, which is free as well, which teaches you very similar things that's in the book. And then if it's something where you want to learn how to blog and things like that too, they have even more courses and things like that, all free available. Again, that idea of free content out there. Definitely go check it out for sure. Huge fans of HubSpot, obviously. So go ahead, Daniel. You have another good one.
The next thing, probably I'm not feeling guilty, but finally I'm able, let's say, to say that Radario is also having a great blog, and guys, we are creating blog and about all of the things that we actually mentioned in our podcast today, about the KPIs, about the event metrics, about the tools that you could use, not only about the Radario, because our idea of the company and let's say our mission is not to sell our product, but to educate you. This is a really important, and this is a totally different approach, some kind of a startup approach. The first thing is make the customer happy. The next thing, sell him a product. I would like to be honest with you in that case, guys. So feel free to visit our blog at by the way, you made a mistake. I would like to with Radario with A, not O, like RADARIO.cc.
I can't spell this in my life.
So visit our blog. It's worth of your time. We are not hard selling our product. I got really interested. In fact, this is how we met, Will. We would like to, this is kind of our story. You read our article and you say, hey, Daniel, you got a great article about the KPIs. Why don't we create a podcast out of that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been really fantastic. All right, quick fire. We only got a couple minutes left. So, what do you got for us in terms of some other blogs that you enjoy reading?
I love Eventbrite blog. They are great guys. They have great content, and they got tons of insights for any kind of event organizer. Let's say from having a let's say, I don't know, like beer festival to having, like, let's say, multinational conference. And the second thing is the Bizabu blog. They're also cool guys. I love reading their blog. Probably the greatest thing about the Bizabu is that they're creating a really great industry researchers. Like, let's say, if I would like to understand the state of the industry, let's say in 2016, I will go to bizabu.com.
Absolutely. We love those guys as well. All right. And 3 favorite gadgets, which are always my favorite part.
So the first one is Microsoft Surf Facebook. So to be honest, I'm also a geek. And, I fall in love with Microsoft Surf Facebook like 2 years ago with the first version. But, I didn't want to be a beta user. So, I'm saving money to get a Surf Facebook 2 because, it's insane. Hey guys, if you hate if you hate the current generation of MacBooks without getting rid of all of the sports and all that stuff, take a look at Microsoft Surf Facebook. They do not pay me for that. This is not a paid advice. This is like advice of a user. I love MacBooks. I'm using them for 9 years. And I'm still using MacBook Pro from 2012, the ones that you could still upgrade, And, if I consider having a new book, I really strong consider Surf Facebook. I really love it. It's like a pure tech, a pure art of technology. I really love that. The second thing, go on, please.
I was just going to comment. I will switch from MacBook to Windows about in September or so. And I started with the Surface Pro. And I really loved it. A lot smaller. I love the form factor. It's huge. And then I realized it didn't have enough power. And in fact, it kind of struggled sometimes to run this podcast. It turns out it was the computer, the model I had just had some issues and I never realized it. So I took it in and they said, oh yeah, we can definitely replace this. And I said, well, I'm also considering upgrading to the Surface Book 2. It's a little bit more powerful. And this is the kind of service level that Apple used to be like, but they don't do anymore. And they said, okay, cool. That Surface Pro you had, we'll credit towards your account. You can pick up a Surface Pro and just play the difference. I had that laptop for 6 months before they did that. Most places would be like, nah, we'll give you a refurbished version of it, and it might suck just as bad, but good luck. That's the only thing you're going to get. But they let me upgrade basically for just the difference in cost, which was only a couple $100 for a newer laptop that came out after I bought my Surface Pro. So highly recommend. I've been really happy with my Surface Book 2 too. So, and Microsoft in general. So
absolutely. And the one interesting insight that I found out about the Microsoft, let's say somewhere around 60 to 70% of revenue of Apple goes from iPhone. And surprisingly, people consider Microsoft as a, let's say, Windows company, Office company. And only 10% of revenue from Microsoft goes from Windows, and only, let's say, less than 10% goes from Office. Just think about it. Let's say this is all about the diversification. It's really important.
Absolutely.
So the next thing is, about the wearable tech. I'm a geek. I'm not joking. You know, like I got the first Kickstarter version of Pebbles since the beginning of 2012. And I was probably the person who was so much upset when actually such kind of a great company that sold over 1 million devices around the world. I personally purchased 3 of those. Actually, you know, they shut down. What does it mean for us? It means that you could get a great outstanding watches, like smart watches, with a work time for like close to 1 or 2 weeks, let's say without need a charge, with great in colored display for somewhere around like $70, like $70. You know, it's really great deal. You know, I understand that the company closed and you won't get a warranty, but hey guys, I got the watches for 6 years and I didn't have any kind of problems of those. You know, like I think like a great deal from my point of view.
Love it. Love it. All right. And last but not least,
you know, like I love hearing music. Like honestly, you know, I'm listening to the music since my 2nd grade. Honestly, you know, I got a cassette player at that time, and I'm still listening to music all of the time. I couldn't imagine myself without listening to music. You know, this is kind of obsession. I'm not joking, because I love a lot of music, and you know, I'm using the wireless headphones for ages. Like, you know, I'm kind of geek. I got all this armature stuff, like amplifiers, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, this is kind of too geeky. So I listened like too close to 20 different wireless headphones before I selected those ones that I shared with you, like Bose Sound Sport.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they got a sport in their name, but at the very same time, from my point of view, they got one of the best quality of sound among even way more expensive wired headphones, and also they're waterproof. You know, they cost somewhere around like $1.5 grand, some kind of like that. You know, like one of the best, from my point of view, price value ratio in the wireless headphones industry right now.
Definitely. I'm a huge fan. I have the QC35s, which is the wireless version of the
yeah.
Love them. And then there's the in-ear version too. But the neckband, I kind of got over really quickly. But I ended up giving my fiance, and she absolutely loves them too. So definitely, if for a long time you think Bose kind of overrated, if you're not using them, definitely I think it's one of the most commonly shared things on our shows is some sort of like Bose noise canceling or non-noise canceling headphones. So I love it. I had one last resource that I wanted to share that I think everyone would love. Since we're talking analytics, one of my new favorite software is called DataBox. It's basically what's called a dashboards website. It creates dashboards, and there's a lot of sites that do this. DataBox is doing it by getting as many people to connect to it as possible. And essentially, imagine all those metrics we talk about: customer acquisition cost, your total revenue, all those things like that. You can essentially put them up on your TV and have it live up there, and it'll automatically update for you. And you can set up daily scorecards that get sent out to your team, and they see it right on their phone where they're at on metrics. Weekly scorecards. We have it set up to go into our Slack channel so the whole team sees it, and we have discussions about each metric each week. Huge and awesome. Highly recommend DataBox. It's like $50 a month. Absolutely nothing for the fact that it combines. And it's cool too. Oh my gosh, this is where it gets really nerdy. You can do custom formulas too. So for example, in order to discover customer acquisition costs, there's not a lot of softwares that give you that information. So we had to pull information from our accounting software, our marketing software, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, all the places that we acquire customers, and then create a formula. And you can just type that in and say, pull this metric from this place, this metric from this place, this metric, divide that one by that one, times it by that one, and boom, it spits out a number. So cool. If you love analytics, DataBox is where it's at. It's really, really cool, especially if you run a company. All right. Well, that's the whole episode. Oh my gosh, I could literally talk about this forever. We didn't even get a chance to go into we had 8 or 9 metrics. There's probably hundreds we could have gone through. We will definitely have a further conversation in the Facebook group. But before we do that, I wanted to thank you, Daniel, so much for being on the show. This was so fantastic, so insightful, and I think you blew a couple people's minds.
Always welcome. My pleasure.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, before you guys leave, stick around real quick. I have a cool piece of news to share. I should have shared this at the beginning, but exciting news. We're going to be doing some live shows from events these next couple weeks. So you want to listen up really, really quickly. I actually should pull up the show calendar so I can give you the exact dates that we are doing this. But if you don't remember, about 2 years ago, we did a show live from IMEX where we actually interviewed icons. We literally did 2-hour-long episode, rapid fire, and you know, all the people from all over the industry coming in and talking. Really, really cool. Our number one watched episode of all time, still to this day, which is really, really cool. And so you definitely are not going to want to miss these. But back to back on August 15th, we're going to be doing a live episode from ILEA Live, from the International Live Events Association Conference, ILEA Live, and we'll be live from ILEA Live. And that's going to be a fantastic episode. So we'll be in Denver for that one. It's going to be really, really cool talking about that show and also about the Global Event Forum that's going on as well simultaneously. And then the next week, I mean, you literally have to wait a week for this to happen again. The next week, every single host from EventIcons will be together in one place in Salt Lake City for Connect Marketplace. This is such a big deal. We are moving the episode from the 22nd to the 23rd. So normally it's on Wednesday, 22nd. It will be on Wednesday, the 23rd. And we're going to be doing a live episode featuring as many event professionals as fast as we can in 2 hours. And you're going to get to see us all live together. And it's going to be fantastic because some of us haven't even met before. So it'll be like probably the most exciting episode to watch. So again, that's the 15th of August for ILEA Live, episode 126, and then episode 127 on the 23rd for Connect Marketplace. But don't worry, we have one more episode before then, which is one of our most popular episodes, which is Shit Event Planners Say with Aaron Kaufman. So you're not going to want to miss out on that one. We have a lot of exciting episodes. We're all booked out for the rest of the year, and we're already working on 2019. So it's going to be awesome. All right. So that's about upcoming episodes. That was my big news. I'm so excited. And next good thing to keep in mind, if you are watching this show, we record this every single Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern, right here live on Zoom. This is the best place to watch the show because you get to directly talk to the guests. You get to ask questions as they're coming in. You get to shape the conversation of the entire episode. Best place to sign up for that is www.event-icons.com. We also do a behind the scenes live on Facebook Live. However, don't bank on that being live all the time. You might have noticed if you watched today, Facebook Live was down and didn't even work, so we couldn't broadcast. So again, the best place to watch live, event-icons.com. That's where we're going to be always broadcasting from. But we do some behind the scenes on Facebook Live. And then following Tuesday, we will post a recording of this with all the show notes, the transcription, some captions in case you want to watch this during work and you don't have audio. And we'll also be posting it on Pocket Cast, Stitcher, iTunes, wherever you watch podcasts, we will be on. And I think we're gaining to try to be on Spotify really soon as well. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, again, if you have questions, you have ideas for our show, we want to hear from you. When you sign up at event-icons.com, you'll get an invite to our Facebook group where I'm sure Daniel will be living for the next week answering all of your questions. So please feel free to come and join us and ask questions. Give us your ideas for topics. Tell us who you want to see on the show. We listen. I'm in there every day as well. So I'd love to see you guys all there again. Event-icons.com. Sign up. You'll get the Facebook invite, and it'll be awesome to see you there. So that's this week's episode. That was a very long outro. I'm so sorry, everyone, but there was a lot of cool news to share. But again, thank you so much to Daniel again for being on the show, dropping the KPIs and metrics talk. And we'll see you guys all next week for episode 125 of Shit Event Planners Say. Everybody have a fantastic day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.